Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So far we only have one participant, but inshallah we will proceed anyway. And we'll also record this session so that anyone who wanted to come, they can also listen to it on the group when we share it later. So first of all, can you hear me right now? If you can, please just say yes in the chat. If you're able to hear me, okay, Alhamdulillah. So I know that the mic is working. So far, there are certain things that we've stressed so far in the group chats and also in these meetings. We really stressed the difference between the nafs and the spirit, and we really stressed about the importance of knowing that and how that can lead to a lot of freedom from stress and despair and give you the necessary mindset to really conquer addictions. And we also talked about how there are different triggers. Triggers always come before addictions, and we really stressed how much addressing those triggers and coming up with a plan for those triggers are going to lead to freedom from addictions. And another thing we stressed a lot so far has been the muraqabah dua, right? So we've talked about how important doing muraqabah dua is to establish a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's also an outlet for all of our problems and stress. And you're also turning in need to Allah for help with addiction. So these three things we've stressed a lot over and over again, and they're very, very important and key to conquering addictions. And there have also been some other things that we've gone over. For example, we've mentioned about how important mentorship is, right? And we're going to inshallah stress more and more about the importance of having a mentor. No matter what level you're at with your addiction, having a mentor will greatly improve your quality of life and your struggle with addiction as well. And also we want to talk about, stress the importance of group support and get people more active in the group, because that's also something that's very, very important for addictions. We briefly mentioned about the motivation meditation. So I don't know if you remember that, but we went over a little practice session in the last meeting, that it's a type of meditation that can give you motivation when you're lacking and you really need motivation. And we also talked a little bit about how journaling can help with your emotions and increase your positivity. And I briefly mentioned about how you can make a relapse prevention plan anytime you relapse. And also we discussed a little bit about how to deal with boredom. So if there's anything in all of this that we've discussed so far, and that the things that we've stressed very highly, if there's any questions that yourself has, you can mention them to me right now. If there's any other questions unrelated to this but related to addictions, you can also ask as well on the group chat. And inshallah, whatever the question is, inshallah, I'll try to answer it right now. Or if you think of any question during this meeting as well, then also please just write it down. And also, please just let me know how are you doing? How is your journey with addiction, or the person that you know who has an addiction, if you're helping them, how has that been going? And what of all these things that we mentioned thus far, everything that we've been stressing in the group chats, in the meetings, what has been helping you the most? So if you would like to share that, please do so in the group chat as well. So there are more things that we need to still discuss, as a group, and also in these meetings, we need to um, talk about, and this is something, the things I'm about to mention, there are more things that you would discuss with your mentor, because you need personal plans for these things, is how to have a plan to do tawbah, and how to track yourself uh, in the tawbah tracker, which is the second sheet that you're given after your triggers plan. So this is very important, because a lot of times when a person has a very moderate to severe addiction, they end up hurting a lot of people along the way. So they have to have a means of rectifying those relationships, and that's what's done in the second tracker, which is the Toba tracker. When you come up with a plan for how you're going to make up those wrongs, and how you're also going to get up each time you fall with more positivity. And also a dhikr can be given, an istighfar dhikr, to help you every day during that time. And then after that, there is the freedom trackers, where you really just put your foot down and you try your best to abstain from the addiction for 30 days straight. And then when you're successful with that, then there's the mind tracker, where you watch your mind even, and you don't even think of the addictive thing. So these are also very, very important things that we haven't discussed much, because they're a little bit, there's something that need to be discussed more with the mentor, but we will also discuss them in the group from now on, inshallah. And then there are also things like the the 7 trees of life, how to make your life worth living, type of life that doesn't have any room for addictions, that doesn't have any room for any desire or need for any harmful addictions. So this is a very wholesome and thorough, uh, program to really, really, give your give a solution and freedom from addiction, inshallah. Today, what we want to talk about is the nafs, a little bit more about the nafs. We've discussed that the nafs is not you, and that you are the spirit. But reason we want to go over the nafs a little bit more today is because the nafs has to do with your emotions, right? That is where your emotions are coming from. And an addiction is really, is you allowing your nafs to control you. It's you allowing the emotions to control you, or it's you falling for or believing in the nafs's feelings, the nafs's deception. The nafs inside of you, it can't see ahead. It only sees the here and now, and it doesn't have a mind. It just has feelings. So if you believe in the nafs's feelings, that can deceive you and make you more inclined to the addiction, or falling for the addiction. And if you allow those immediate feelings and emotions to control you, that is basically what an addiction is. And a person who has a problem with addictions, that's what's overcoming them. So this is a very important topic to discuss, and inshallah we're going to go over some skills, because the way to overcome the addiction is to become smarter and realize that we cannot trust our feelings, the immediate reactions, that the immediate feelings that we get, emotional reactions that we get, and that we have to start practicing skills to counter the feelings, right? And we'll discuss what those skills are exactly, and how much they help with addictions, inshallah. Another interesting point about the nafs and feelings and emotions is that the when a person has an addiction, he or she has been acting on a bad habit for a long time. Your brain actually decreases your aversion to the pain that you experience in addiction. So what do I mean by that? Is that your your brain actually tricks you. Your brain actually prevents you from remembering the painful experiences you had when you gave in to the addiction. And the brain also increases your expectation and desire for the pleasure and addiction more than there actually is pleasure there. So the brain also participates in making you feel uh, that there's more pleasure there than there is, and that there's less pain than there actually is. So that's a very interesting thing, that your brain is basically lying to you, and your nafs is lying to you because it can't see the future, and it can't think past its own feelings, and it doesn't have a mind actually. So if you just go by your feelings, you definitely will be deceived, and you will keep falling into the same problem. So inshallah, let's go over these slides really quickly. And anytime you have a question, please just mention it. So our nafs and addiction, emotional intelligence, higher level thinking. So we'll explain what that means. So first of all, you if you are powerless, who and what are you powerless over? So you don't have to, it says break into groups, you don't have to do that. But just mention in the chat box, what do you think that you're powerless over? We just mentioned the whole topic, and I just kind of explained it already, but just so that I know that everyone is following along. In an addiction, you're powerless, right, over something, but what are you powerless over? Your nafs, mashallah, Abir. So exactly, that's our topic at hand. So what is the nafs exactly? Mashallah, Fawzia, emotions, definitely. The nafs and emotions, which are the same thing that we're talking about here. Your nafs is a spiritual entity that's inside you, and that's responsible for the emotions and desires that come and go within you. Okay? And we emphasize this point over and over, that it's not you who wants the drug, it's not you who wants the addictive thing or the action. It's your nafs actually that has that attachment and addiction. And you can overpower the nafs, right? The nafs wants you to think that you can't do that, but you can overpower it. And the question is then, how can you overpower it? So first of all, let me ask you, what is it that if you do for what is it that if you do, you will power your nafs? You will give more power and strength to your nafs. Giving into the desires, mashallah, Bir. So definitely. So when you give into your desires, when you give into the emotions immediately on the spot, you're going to make the nafs stronger. So then what about the spirit? How, what is it that can make the nafs weaker, or make actually what's happening is what can make you stronger than the nafs? Right? So the answer would be the opposite, right? If you give the spirit what it wants instead, if you don't give in to your immediate desire, nafsanic desires, but you practice giving the spirit what it wants more and more, then your spirit will become stronger. So it's like a battle, as you can see here. The two people are arm wrestling. And what do you feed the nafs with? What are some things that Abir mentioned, giving into desires? So let's see. Let's take a look here. You will feed the nafs with hastiness, right? If you just give in to your desires and compulsions, if you don't think, right? So this is an important point, that how do you empower and feed your nafs is when you don't use your mind, when you don't think, and you just give in without waiting, and you hastily give in. So that feeds the nafs every time you do that. Now, what's the opposite of that? that you feed your spirit with? What's the opposite of hastiness? What's the opposite of not thinking? Is that why you say, okay, Abir's asking, is that why you sit with the urge? Patience. Okay, mashallah. Abir, definitely that's exactly why you sit with the urge, because you want to give the spirit patience. You want to give the spirit time to think, right? So if you give yourself, instead of acting with hastiness and without thinking, you feed the spirit with what's called um, it's called higher level thinking and patience. So that's how you start to empower your spirit, right? And this is what we have to basically practice. This is what is called emotional intelligence, right? It's when you start to realize that you cannot trust your emotions and feelings, and you have to have a plan for any time you have a reactionary emotion, anytime you have a very strong and negative feeling, or even a very strong positive feeling. But if it's leading you towards the addiction, then you have to have a plan for that, how to think beyond that, how to have higher level thinking and patience to counteract those emotions. So that's what you feed your spirit with. The nafs is not a bad thing, right? That's an important point to mention. It's not like it's in an intentional enemy. It's just something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. It's there for our survival, and it's a test for us as well. And the baby, for example, is completely all nafs, right? The human baby, it just wants to survive. It just needs to survive. And during the first few years of life, the nafs becomes very dominant, right? It's the thing that is helping the child to survive. It always wants food. It wants things for itself to survive, and it becomes dominant. And it's the thing that's going to become the test in the future. So it's very important that we have to guide our children from the very beginning and help them to give into to empower their spirits so that they can be prepared for the battle with the nafs, right? And also animals have a nafs as well, that it basically is there for their survival, right? So it's important we mention these points. So just really quickly, the nafs is not you. The nafs and emotions, they don't force you to do something. They just create a urge or a want to do a certain thing. So nobody can come and say that, it was my nafs that made me do it. No, the nafs is there, and it actually helps you in many ways, but sometimes it will hurt you if you just listen to it, right? So, but you have the option of whether you listen to it or not. And the nafsanic feelings and emotions and desires, they're just fleeting, meaning the nafs will tell you that you have to give in, but the reality is the higher level thought is that no, this feeling will pass. I won't always be this angry. I won't always have this strong of an urge for this particular addiction. It just feels like that, but it will pass. So you have to know that in your mind. You have to know that with certainty that no, it's definitely a fleeting emotion. So Abir mentioned that small children like blaming the nafs. They say, but I didn't mean to do it. Okay, mashallah. So yeah. So children, they like to blame everyone and everything besides themselves, which is exactly what their nafs wants them to feel like. The nafs doesn't want to take responsibility and blame because that is temporarily painful. So the nafs is just going to want to blame everyone and everything besides itself, everyone and everything besides me, right? So that's a nafsanic thing that children do. And then in order to counteract the nafs, as we mentioned, we have to have a plan. We have to wait before making any decisions and think about it, and practice the different thinking skills that we're going to go over, inshallah. So this is a new mindset that we want to attain. Everything that we're going to talk about from now on, inshallah, is going to be uh, what the mindset of someone who's addicted. He might think, for example, that it says here is discomfort a bad thing. So someone who is addicted, they might think that discomfort is a terrible thing and there's no way to handle it besides through the addiction. But now we want to think about the higher level thinking, right? The real thinking, the reality, to counteract that and balance it and kind of neutralize that feeling. So let me ask you this question then: is discomfort a bad thing? If you think that it is, explain why, and if you think that it's not, mention why you think that it's not a bad thing. So, for example, let's say you have a project that's coming up for in your workplace, and you feel nervous about it. That's a type of discomfort, right? So, is that discomfort, that nervous feeling that you have, is that a bad thing? So you said, Abir said, discomfort makes you take charge of your actions. So, mashallah. So, yes, so if you look at it in this way, discomfort is just pointing you towards an action that you should do, right? So if I feel nervous that I have to do a project or let's say a presentation at work, then the way to handle it, what that nervousness is telling me is prepare, just prepare for it. You know, the more you prepare, then the better you'll feel about it and you'll inshallah do a good job as well. And Abir also mentioned that so discomfort of your sins gets you to do istighfar. So mashallah, that's another amazing point, that discomfort is a good thing, right? Because especially after we sin, we don't feel comfortable. And first of all, that is going to prevent you from, that's going to make you want to do the sin less, right? Because if every time you commit the sin, you feel very bad, then that's going to create a type of desire in you not to want to commit that sin over and over again. And also, it's going to make you want to fix that feeling. So the only way to fix it is to do istighfar. The only way to get rid of that feeling of discomfort is to ask forgiveness from Allah and to try to make up for any wrongs that you've done and to try to uh, make intention never to commit that sin again. When you do that, it heals the bad feeling. So discomfort is not bad. It's very useful. It tells us something might not be right, right? And it motivates us to change the situation or our thinking about it. So, for example, if you if you have pain somewhere in your body, it feels bad, but if you didn't have that, you would never know that something is not right, right? And people who have diabetes, for example, they may not be able to feel any pain in their feet, right? But because they don't feel any pain in their feet, they end up injuring their feet and they end up getting disease in their feet, and it ends up sometimes they have to amputate their foot because they never felt the pain. If they just felt a little bit of pain, they would have been able to avoid such a huge problem. Now, it's also mentioned here that discomfort either leads to you making a change in your action or you're thinking about it. So what is meant over here by that? What does it mean that you change your thinking about it? So for example, let's say you do commit a sin, you fall back into an addiction and you feel terrible. You make istighfar, you do tawbah, you return back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you still don't feel good. Let's just say you made a strong intention to get back on track and you made up for the sins you committed. You've asked forgiveness from somebody you hurt, you're making dua for those you've hurt, and you're starting to do good deeds again, but you still feel terrible, you still feel despairful. So so what does that mean now? Does that mean that I've changed my action but I'm still not feeling good? right? So in this example, the person needs to change their thinking, right? They've done the correct action, but they need to change their thinking. They're still depressed and despairful because they're thinking about the situation is wrong, right? They're having way too high expectation on themselves, and they also need to think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful, right? And they need to think that they are human being, that they can sin, anytime, and that it's okay because they're a human being that they will sin, but they need to return back to Allah. And they've done that. Now they need to think about Allah's mercy and have hope in Allah's mercy. So they have to change their thinking, right, in this situation. So Abir mentioned, yeah, husn in dhan in Allah, meaning having a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you mentioned if you step on a thorn, you step away. So I don't 100% exactly know what you meant by that. Meaning if you, meaning that's a discomfort. If you step on a thorn, you get pain and then you move away. So yeah, you would prevent yourself from further harm. Yes, mashallah. So we change the action. We change our action. We change our thinking. So discomfort can be any of these things. It can be physical pain. It can be the withdrawal that you're feeling from stopping an addiction. It can be anxiety, sadness, frustration, anger. All these things can be considered discomfort. And so now you know that discomfort is not a bad thing, and a person should expect that they will always that discomfort is a part of life, right? You can never live such a perfect life that you'll never be uncomfortable. You will be, because it's a means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing you the right direction, right? So you will experience different types of discomfort throughout your life. So every single emotion, including discomfort, uncomfortable emotions, they have a purpose, right? When you understand the purpose, then you can have the correct reaction, and then you can then let go of the emotion, right? So, for example, not every negative emotion is negative, and not every positive emotion is positive, right? So what do we mean by that? What do I mean that not every negative emotion is negative and not every positive emotion is positive? So can anyone give me an example? How can there be an example of a negative emotion that's not really negative? And what's an example of a positive emotion that's not really positive? So Abir mentioned that guilt is a negative emotion, but it's good if you turn back to Allah. So mashallah, so definitely yes, guilt is a negative emotion, but it's not a negative thing. It's a good thing for you because it leads you to turning back to Allah and making up for any evil or wrongdoing that you did. And then Abir mentioned happiness in sin. So yes, mashallah. So if you are happy when you commit a sin, that's a positive emotion, but it's not a positive thing because it is leading you to commit more sin, right? And harming yourself and harming others more. So those are two excellent examples. So for example, over here, you might feel positive and relieved when you take a drug, right? So whatever addictive thing or sin that there is, like Abir mentioned, you might feel happy, you might feel positive. There are other things that drugs do for you, but ultimately it's bad for you. Ultimately, it's going to lead to a lot of harm in your life and others' lives over time. And ultimately, it's bad for you. So it's not a positive thing just because it's a positive emotion. So again, this is the people get deceived because they feel good temporarily. Their nafs is telling them it's a good thing, but it's not, right? It's, you have to think beyond just feelings. And then an example of a negative emotion that's not really negative is, for example, when somebody passes away, when somebody dies, you might feel sad, you might miss them. But ultimately, that's a good thing because if you get the message, right? It won't be good if you hold on to it and you keep on getting into depression, despair, and you think about it incorrectly. But if you actually think about it properly, then any emotion you think about properly, you'll have the solution for that emotion. So if you think about the message in this sadness that you're feeling, then you'll be able to let go of that sadness and actually uh, you know react to it properly, so that you learn the message from that emotion. So if somebody dies, let's say, and you feel sad, what is the message in that emotion? What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala trying to tell you through that sadness that you feel? Every soul shall taste death. Okay, so mashallah, Fozia mentioned that Allah is telling you to turn to Him through that sadness. MashaAllah. So yes, so these are messages, and Abir mentioned to do sadaqah jariyah for that person. Okay. So MashaAllah. So these are all good reactions and messages that Allah is telling you. Fozia is saying that to change. So okay, so there's some type of change that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. So yes, MashaAllah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you all these messages. If you take these messages from it and you act according to them, then the emotion will resolve itself, right? So if somebody has died and you feel sad, then you turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for company. You turn to Allah for help. You do sadaqah jariyah for that person if you fear for them and what's happening for them in their grave, or you're worried about them, then you take action. You do sadaqah jariyah, you try to do dua for them, and that will make you feel better as well about the situation. And another message that you can get from it is that you should value the people in your life, right? Because that person has died now and you feel sad that they're gone. So that is basically telling you that, okay, don't treat the people that are alive right now in a bad way, because they can die at any time and you'll be sad when they're gone. So value them now while they're alive, right? And that will help you to have positive relationships in your life. So subhanallah, we take people for granted, definitely. So mashallah. So that's something, every emotion is actually bringing you to something good if you understand the message in it. So this is the one skill that I want you to take away from here more than anything. Um, so actually, that's on the next slide. So very quickly, we'll do this one. So in terms of discomfort, let's say someone is saying, I can't handle the pressure of my new job. This is too much. I need a cigarette. First of all, what is telling them to smoke a cigarette? Let's say somebody they just got a new job and they feel very pressured and they have this thought, this is just too much pressure. I need to go smoke a cigarette right now. So who is telling them, or what is telling them that this is too much and that they need a cigarette? Their anxiety, mashallah. So Fawzi is saying their anxiety, their emotions, definitely. So their nafs is telling them, oh, this is just too terrible. This is uncomfortable, and a cigarette would make me feel better. So that's the immediate feeling that you get, the reactionary feeling that you get to the discomfort. Now, what would be a better way of handling this situation? What else? What can they think besides this? What can they think that would be higher level thinking that would help them to tolerate the pressure that they're feeling or the discomfort that they're feeling? So if you think of something, mention it. What do you think that they can think instead? So mashallah, Abir said, Allah is greater than my worry. Mashallah. So yes, definitely they can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, specifically for this example, how can they manage that emotion? How can they think more realistically? So Fawzi is saying, what if they're not close to Allah? So exactly. So in this situation, the person can think other things as well. to manage that emotion, right? So you can distract yourself. Okay, but what about just handling this head on and dealing with the actual situation? So let me give you the answer here so that you understand what I'm saying. So instead, a person can think, okay, I feel pressure right now, but eventually I'll learn how to manage the job, and then the job will bring me a lot of joy, right? So the person is starting to think realistically that, okay, I might feel uncomfortable right now, but this is not permanent. I'm going to learn how to figure out the job just like everyone does. And then the job will start to bring me a lot of joy, right? So when you think like this, when you think about the future in a realistic manner and you think in a higher level way, then it helps to neutralize that feeling, right? So you realize I don't need a cigarette. It might feel pressure right now, but I know I'm going to feel better later on. I know I'm going to start to enjoy the job in the future after I learn how to manage it. So this is one example of how to think, how to use your mind to neutralize extreme negative emotions and negative thinking, right? So instead of going through this next example, let me go through the main skill that I wanted to teach everyone today. And so I want you to take 1 or 2 minutes and answer the following. So if you had higher expectations of yourself, how often would you fail? One, answer how often would you fail to meet them? So for example, let's say if you have higher expectations of yourself, would you fail to meet them 10% of the time? If you had very high expectations of yourself when it comes to your job, your family, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would you fail to meet those expectations 10%, 20%, 50%, 70% of the time? How often would you meet those expectations? Would you actually meet those expectations you have of yourself, those high expectations, 10%, 20%, 50%, 70% of the time? And then number three, answer how often would you exceed them, meaning how often would you go even beyond whatever your expectations are of yourself? Would it be 10% of the time, 5% of the time, 80% of the time? So take a minute or two and think about those percentages. And yes, Abir, you said it depends on the day. That's definitely true. But now think about overall in your life. Let's say, all an entire year's worth of days. How often would you meet those expectations you have on yourself? How often would you fail to meet them? And how often would you exceed them? So Foze, you said 25%. So 25% for which one? Failing to meet them or meeting them or exceeding them? Okay, so Abir mentioned for the first one, she believes that she would fail to meet high expectations 60% of the time. Okay, mashallah. And then after you answer these three, then think about the opposite as well. If you had lower expectations, then how often would you, one, fail to meet them, two, meet them, and three, how often would you exceed those lower expectations? So Abir mentioned the second one, she thinks she would meet her high expectations 50% of the time. Okay, so Fozia is saying if she had high expectations of herself for certain things, she would fail to meet them 25% of the time. And then after you answer these questions, I want you to answer the last question on here, which is, which do you think is better for a person? For them to have higher expectations on themselves or for them to have lower expectations on themselves? And think about why. So let's go over it together as well, inshallah. So you said, Abir said, having higher expectations to improve yourself and become your best self. Okay, so this is what Abir is saying, that she believes that having higher expectations is better, because then you will really try to improve yourself and become your best self. So let's see here. If you had higher expectations, let's say someone who has very high expectations of themselves, how many times will they fail to reach it? Let's say, for example, 90% of the time, right? Let's say you had such high expectations that you failed to reach those expectations 90% of the time. How would you feel then if you failed to meet them 90% of the time? Would you feel great about that? Or would you feel frustrated? Would you feel upset with yourself? So Fawzi is saying very happy. So in this example, I'm saying that a person, if they have high expectations of themselves, and then because of that, they fail to reach those expectations 90% of the time. So let's say they have very high expectations that they're always going to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time, right? But they find every day, they look at themselves and they see, no, I had a shortcoming here, I had a shortcoming there. And they start to think that 90% of the time they are just always failing to meet those expectations, that they believe they should be perfect, but they are failing 90% of the time. How would they feel about themselves? So Abir says disappointed or motivated to be better the next day. So, okay, Abir is saying disappointed. So definitely they're going to feel disappointed if they fail. But also Abir is saying they can be motivated as well to do better the next day. So, okay, that's true too. It depends on their expectation as well, right? So they might try to do better as well. So let's see. How many times would they reach those high expectations? Maybe let's say 7% of the time, somebody who believes that they will avoid, let's say, all the sins, or they have very high expectations for their work. They believe they will put in 5 hours of work every single day, outside of, for whatever project they're working on, whatever it is. If they have very high expectations, maybe they only meet them 7% of the time. And maybe they only exceed and go above and beyond those expectations 3% of the time. So the question then is that a good way to live life? To have such high expectations of yourself that you become this type of person who is failing 90% of the time, is only reaching their expectations 7% of the time, and is only going above and beyond it 3% of the time? Is this person gonna live a good life? What do you think the answer is? Okay, Abir said, no, you've set yourself to misery. Yes, so precisely, that's exactly what it is. So this person is going to feel like they're a failure, right? They're going to feel like they're just not good enough. And because they're not meeting the expectation they set for themselves, right? And so they're going to feel bad most of the time. And this type of person, believe it or not, this type of the person is the one who most of the time has problems with addictions, because they feel so upset at themselves all the time that they feel like they need something to relieve those feelings, because nothing else is working for them. No matter what they try, they're failing most of the time according to what they expect of themselves. And so they're always feeling bad. And at if there's then there becomes no other solution for them except to turn to addiction in their mind, right? So now imagine the opposite. Imagine you had lower expectations of yourselves, and imagine that you failed only 10% of the time to reach those expectations. Maybe you imagine now that, okay, no, I'm not a perfect person. I will make mistakes in the day. Or maybe your expectation is for work that okay, I'm only going to work on these projects, half hour at least every single day. That's what I expect of myself. That a half hour to an hour I would definitely put in. Now, as opposed to 5 hours for the person with high expectations. Now this person, let's say they only fail to reach it 10% of the time. So how would that make them feel? You know? And imagine they reach their expectation 40% of the time, and they actually exceed their expectation 50% of the time. So they imagine that they expected themselves only that I'm going to give half hour of work or an hour of work every day, and they actually go above it 50% of the time. They work longer than that. Or they understood that they're going to have many shortcomings in the day with sins and other things, but they will 50% of the time they'll actually have a very good day that's going to be full of good deeds, and uh, they're avoiding all the sins and everything like that. So how would that person feel? They will keep going and keep doing good things, right? So Abir is mentioning they're going to keep going and keep doing things. So they're going to have positive reinforcement. They're going to feel good about themselves, and they'll want to continue. So how will your life feel living with lower expectations? You're going to feel amazing, right? You're going to feel like you're always exceeding your expectations, that you're always reaching your goals, and that very few times you do fail, but you can get back up because it's not over and over. It's not all the time, right? So look at the difference in mentality. This person who has lower expectations, he's much less likely to have addictions because he's happier with his life, right? She or he is happier with their life because they're meeting their goals, they're meeting their expectations on themselves, and they're even going above and beyond it so many of the times, right? So the question then is, what is wiser? It's wiser to have lower expectations. Now, Abir is saying, is that a lazy approach or a sensible one? And then slowly increase expectations. So you're asking, is that a lazy approach? So yes, if somebody is having a complete and utter low expectation of themselves, that they're not doing any work and they're being lazy, then yes, then they are going to an extreme, right? And yes, they should be more sensible then. Uh, And yes, you're also correct that you can increase your expectations as you get better as well. So if you remember on the group chat, I mentioned that if you've recently fallen into sins and you've fallen into addictions, then you might be feeling very low energy. You might feel like you don't even have energy to get back up. So in those circumstances, you should lower your expectation on yourself and just do 2 minutes of a certain practice that you left, because you want to plant the seeds again and do something that you can actually achieve, right? So you lower your expectation on yourself, and then over time you'll be able to do more and more. Your energy will increase, and then you can raise your expectations that, no, I will do 5 minutes every day. No, I will do 10 minutes of muraqabah dua every day as I've been assigned, right? So you can eventually increase your expectations too. But overall, the message here is that most people with addictions, the reason that they get stuck in addictions over and over again is because they have too much high expectations on themselves, right? They fall into despair. They believe that there's something very, very wrong with them, right? But they should look at their life in a very practical way, that they're dealing with the nafs. They have to learn to make their spirit more powerful, and they have to do it in a practical manner. And they should have expectation that they're going to fall over and over, that they're going to need to slowly improve, and that they should also realize that they're a human being and that they shouldn't expect perfection from themselves, right? So a person has to look at their own life and reflect of how much too high expectation is causing them misery and problems, and if they need to adjust those expectations. And definitely discussing with a mentor will help you to realize as well if your expectations are too high, because sometimes by yourself you think you have to have these very high expectations, But when you talk to someone else, you realize that no, maybe you're looking at life very wrong, right? Uh, I'll give you an example. Recently, someone that I was mentoring, they mentioned to me about how they rated their trees, the different 7 trees, and they rated them very low. So I know this person personally, and they're very involved in the community. They do a lot of charity and good works, and yet they rated their that area of their life, the community tree, as 2 or 4 out of 10, something like that. So they are expecting too much from themselves. They have other areas of their life they have to take care of, their family, their work, their spirituality, and they're having way too high expectation that they need to do so much in the community, and they're feeling bad all the time, right? Even though they're doing amazing work to begin with. So a mentor can help a person realize and see that they're just thinking in an imbalanced and extreme way. So inshallah, I think we'll stop here. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, please write them down. And if you didn't understand anything, please let me know in the chat, inshallah. So just to summarize, so we mentioned wayak. So just to summarize, we discussed how the emotions, if the emotions completely control you, then that is what an addiction is, right? The addiction, the urges that you get are emotions as well. And the more you practice higher level thinking, that will balance out these emotions, that will neutralize them, and it will lead to better decisions and feelings as well. So one of the skills that you have to learn is how to balance your expectations, how to lower them if they're too high, in order to reduce this extreme thinking and these extreme feelings that occur, so that you can act in a healthier way and feel more positive as well. And I also mentioned that one of the main reasons for despair is because we have too high expectations of ourselves, and we're acting almost as if we're not even human. But we should remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us to commit sins. And also he created us to forgive us for those sins. So a person should remember that, and they'll have a much easier time getting up. And because they'll realize that Allah is there just waiting for you to fully embrace you and forgive you and free you once more, and that he created you to forgive you. So when a person starts to lower their expectations on themselves, sometimes this helps with addictions, inshallah. So jazakallah khair, everyone. Inshallah, we'll continue to try to have these meetings every 40 days to try to remotivate ourselves and learn new skills, and also try to be more active in the group as well. If there's any questions, I'm going to try to post every week at least one question, and that will keep all of us engaged and learning from each other, inshallah ta'ala. So inshallah, we'll see each other again in another 40 days and on the group chat as well, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.